Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bolton of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals to state senators to mayors to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about. Elon Musk and his minions are recklessly firing people who safeguard our national security, energy, social security, public health, and so much more. This rampage will do lasting harm to all Americans and people around the world. Fairfax County, Virginia is home to many of these federal workers and agencies. Today, we get a report from Supervisor James Walkinshaw about what it's like to be on the front lines of this fight. He talks about how these cuts impact families, morale, and the politics of Virginia. We also talk about what it's like to go from being a chief of staff to a member of Congress to worrying about sewer lines and trash pickups in local government, and why the latter is so fulfilling. Enjoy. Fairfax County Supervisor James Walkinshaw, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
I want to start, there's so much to cover, but I want to start really with you being on the front lines of the impact of Elon Musk and DOGE and the hits to the federal workforce that are profound across the country, but especially profound in Fairfax County. Can you talk about a little bit about what it's been like for the last 6 weeks and how you see the federal workforce responding?
Yeah, I think it's probably be useful to the listeners to kind of just start with the description of Fairfax County's economy so you can kind of understand the impacts that we're feeling here. Fairfax County is a jurisdiction of 1.1 million people, about 20 minutes to 2 hours outside of DC, depending on the traffic situation. We have in the county at least 80,000 federal employees who live in Fairfax County. Most work in agencies in DC, but some work in the county where their agency or office is located. We also have hundreds of thousands of folks who are federal contractors or work for federal contractors, right? Largely in the defense arena, but really across the spectrum. And what we've experienced in the first several months of the Trump-Musk administration has been pretty significant, as you might imagine. So as the indiscriminate, in my view, reckless job losses started to pile up, you can now go into any neighborhood in Fairfax County and find somebody who has lost their federal job or their federal contracting job as a result. And so, we are working hard to try to connect people with resources to support them. We're working hard to ally with our congressional delegation in Washington to push back on a lot of what's happening. But there's no question it is a difficult time right now in Fairfax County and in the DC region.
Can you talk about what that looks like in terms of, you were on the congressional side, you've seen the work that the federal government does. What are you hearing about in terms of the federal government's ability to respond to natural disasters, national security threats, all the pandemics, all the potential ways that the federal government provides services across the country and the world?
Before I was elected to the Fairfax County Board, I spent more than a decade as the chief of staff for Congressman Gerry Connolly, who represents Fairfax in the United States Congress. So I had the opportunity to work with and alongside so many incredible and dedicated federal employees who really believe in the missions of their respective agencies and delivering for the American people. We have here in Fairfax County a number of the Department of Energy nuclear experts and scientists who were, it seems, mistakenly fired. The people who safeguard our nuclear arsenal were some of the people who were mistakenly fired. People who oversee really powerful and impactful federal programs that help every state in the union have been fired. And it's not just the fact that these folks, have been indiscriminately, sometimes we now know illegally fired. It is that their service has been attacked and denigrated, right? Folks who, in a lot of cases, could have been making a lot more money in the private sector, but chose to dedicate themselves to federal service because they believe in service, are all of a sudden the subject of these really vicious and personal attacks from the person who is supposed to be their boss, the president of the United States, or I guess Elon Musk. And that is really a pernicious thing. And it's going to take, I think, this country and the federal government a long time to recover from that. It's a hard conversation now to have with somebody and encourage them, especially a talented, bright, young person. It's a hard conversation to have with them to try to encourage them to consider a career in the federal government. And I think that's going to be a hard conversation for some time to come.
Yeah. What do you see as the long-term effects? We're obviously going to have short-term, and I want to hear about those in your county that must be impacting everything from small businesses to, office rentals space. But then what do you think the long-term impact is going to be as well?
I think it remains to be seen. Key to minimizing the negative long-term impacts will be, pushing back on as much of what's happening today as possible. And we've seen even recently some successful lawsuits reversing some of the job losses that we've seen. But no question there will be long-term impacts. And I think what I fear is that a young, talented person or even a mid-career professional who's passionate about a particular issue or policy area, maybe that's energy, since we've been talking a little bit about energy. If they're considering a career in the federal government, now do they have to ask, well, that's a career that can take place or that I want to pursue only if one particular party is in the White House. And if the other party wins the White House, they're going to come in on day one and tear it all down, no questions asked. And, we've had that kind of federal government in our country's history. I think we learned from that lesson that it is much more effective to have a nonpartisan, professional civil service that can work across successive presidencies, yes, to implement the policies of that administration, but fundamentally to serve the American people. And I think it's going to be harder to convince people that that's a path or something that they can do for 10, 20, or 30 years.
And talk about your role as a county supervisor. We've also seen the federal government use what were traditionally sort of nonpartisan grants and funding streams as weapons. And so you're sort of on the front lines, both in terms of representing your constituents, but then also in trying to provide services to your community, and talk about what it's been like for you in this role for the last 2 months.
That's right. Yeah. I like to think of local government as we're kind of the end of the line. So when every other level of government fails to solve a problem, right, whether that's stagnant economic growth or income inequality or environmental issues, people look to local government to pick up the pieces or figure it out or solve the problem and deliver the services that other levels of government are failing to deliver. So that's kind of always been our role. I think now the reality is, in the Trump administration, we're going to have to figure out how to do more of that. And we're going to have to do more of that in most cases with fewer resources. So it's incumbent on us to be creative, to build partnerships in our communities with nonprofits, with faith communities, with our neighbors, to support each other and deliver the services that people are going to need. And yeah, you make a good point. One of the implicit and at times explicit threats that we're hearing from the White House is that if you could be a university, a state government, a local government, don't agree with the president's political position on issue X, you're not going to see $1 in funding on issue Y. And I think that is something that people across the country and across the political spectrum should be very, very concerned about. Because if one president can do that, the next president can do that. And I think my message to any president or anyone who wants to be president is, you might think you do, but you don't actually want to be the person deciding the policies that are implemented by every town, city, and county in the United States of America. If you want to do that, you should run for town council or city council or board of supervisors, and then you can make those decisions. But the country doesn't want the president making those decisions. And whether he knows it or not, the president does not want to be the one making those decisions.
And tell us about the responsibilities that you have as a county supervisor. I think people broadly understand the power of the president, and they, to some extent, understand the power of a town council or a mayor. County supervisors always fall in between somewhere. So tell folks what you work on, and maybe a little bit about what you don't work on, and how you try to work with those other levels of government.
So I'll give you the same spiel that I give to Cub Scouts and Girl Scouts when I meet with them. And I usually ask them, tell me, what is the first thing you do, or one of the first things maybe that you do when you wake up in the morning, right? Usually you might go into the restroom, right? You might use the restroom in your home. You might turn on the faucet to brush your teeth. And when you turn on the faucet to brush your teeth and the safe, clean water comes out of your faucet, that water comes to you courtesy not of the President of the United States or the Governor of Virginia and Richmond, but of the Fairfax County Water Authority that's appointed by the Board of Supervisors. When you flush the toilet and the water goes down into the sewer pipes that are underneath the street, it's not the President of the United States or the Governor of Richmond or Congress that maintains those sewer pipes to make sure they're functioning. It's Fairfax County government. And you can go through the course of your day, you get on the school bus that's funded by local taxpayers and the local government. The park that you go to for soccer practice or baseball practice after school is, in most cases, a local park. So the things that impact people's quality of life most directly are the things that we do in local government, the things that we're responsible for. So that's what we do on the Board of Supervisors. In Fairfax, we have a 10-member board. 9 of us represent districts of about 130,000 people each. And fundamentally, our job is to make sure all of those things work for people. And I like to think of my job as part of it. A big part of it is, how can I make people's lives easier? How can I make it simpler, faster, less expensive, and less aggravating? And I think if we go about our work that way and find all of the little problems that we can solve along the way, we can be very effective.
And tell us about addressing those problems in Fairfax County. It's been one of the fastest growing counties, I think, in the country. And so it's changed pretty dramatically over the last generation. Can you talk about what are the issues that you're trying to manage towards and help your community with?
Fairfax County has been an incredible story of growth and economic dynamism for really 100 years now. You go back 100 years. My grandfather grew up on a farm near Dulles Airport at a time when Fairfax County was the #1 dairy producing county in the United States of America, which shocks people now. I think we have one dairy farm left. It's at a park that we maintain to look like a farm. But it's an interesting story, actually. The reason that Fairfax was the #1 dairy producing county in the United States is the farmers came together and formed an association and utilized the latest technologies of the time to make their cows more efficient at producing milk. So they were using technology very early in dairy farming to outpace the rest of the nation. And that's kind of the same thing that we're doing today. Fairfax County is one of the, if not the, leading technology county in the United States of America. We have as many technology companies located here as Silicon Valley. Maybe not bigger names that you would all recognize, but significant technology companies headquartered here. Much of their work with the federal government, but also a lot of commercial work as well. We're one of the leading counties for space technology. We have a growing quantum computing startup ecosystem in the county. So we've kind of taken that technology from our dairy farm predecessors and continued it into present day, now with a population of 1.1 million people and growing. So, we have all of the challenges of an economically dynamic and successful and growing region and jurisdiction, affordable housing challenges, how do we manage that growth and development, transportation challenges, how do we work with our partners in the region to get people where they want to go. But it's been an incredible growth and success story, and I think that's going to continue. We've hit a little road bump here for the next couple of years, I think, with the Trump administration, but I have no question that our growth and success will continue far into the future.
And how'd you find yourself in this position, serving the community that your family has long roots in, but is a dynamic and changing part of a nation?
Yeah, if you had asked me, in high school what I was going to be when I grew up, I probably would not have said a member of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors. I don't think too many high school students would, but the person who really led me in this direction is Gerry Connolly, who represents Fairfax in Congress right now. He previously served on the Board of Supervisors for 14 years, including 5 years as chairman. And when he was elected to Congress in 2008, I became his chief of staff and did that for more than a decade. And I got to listen to him talk about how passionate he was about local government and the great things that you can do in local government, the ability to have a tangible impact on the community that you represent, which is what I really love. In a legislative role, you're hoping that you're moving the needle in the right direction, right? You're pushing and pushing and pushing, hopefully over time, moving things in the right direction. Maybe you can get some legislative language passed that might have a positive effect if it's implemented correctly. At the local level, you can do things that are very practical and you can see the impacts of it, right? So, when I go jogging through the neighborhood surrounding my neighborhood, I can see where I was able to get the sidewalk repaired. I can see the new rec center that we're going to renovate. I can see the new affordable housing community that we're in the process of building. So you can get those tangible things done and be very close to the people and communities you represent. I represent a lot of people, probably relative to most local government officials in the country, but it's still a small enough number that I can engage with each of the neighborhoods that I represent and with a lot of the people that I represent directly on the problems that are impacting their lives and work hand in hand with them to try to solve as many as possible. So it is challenging work, but it's also very rewarding.
And have you always been interested in politics? How'd you get into this field? And also, I mean, a little bit to your point earlier about people looking at service in the federal government and being like, thanks, but no thanks, and it's more trouble than it's worth. Is what keeps you motivated to stay in politics, even as everything gets a little bit rougher and more challenging, more difficult?
Yeah. I did always have an interest in politics, in government. My grandfather served in the Kennedy administration. He was a foreign service officer. So I kind of had that maybe always pulling at me in the background. But my early career was more of a one thing led to another, right? There was an opportunity in front of me, and I did the best I could with it, and another opportunity emerged, and I did the best I could with it, rather than anything that was plotted out or planned out. With respect to your second question, I think for me, and I have this conversation with especially young people that I talk to now, as our politics gets more divisive, more toxic, I think it's actually more important that, good people stick with it and stick it out. Because if the good people, and, it'll be up to my constituents or someone else to determine if I'm one of them, I try to be, but if the good people leave the playing field and, it's only the other folks left, we're not going to be able to turn this thing around. So, I think there's a lot of work to do. But I'm also an optimist. I mean, I'm an optimist about America. I like to read and study about our history, and you can think back to some pretty dark moments in American history that we've been able to emerge from, and in some ways come out stronger. I don't think that's a guarantee, right? I think we got to work for it and make it happen, but I think we can.
Can you talk? I mean, I imagine. In my experience, a lot of folks who work for elected officials in Congress or state legislators think that they'd make pretty good local elected officials if given the chance and opportunity. Can you talk about making that transition and what has surprised you, or what's a lesson for folks who have worked for elected officials but maybe aspire to be one themselves someday?
Yeah, one thing is funny, when I was on the Hill and when I was telling people I was thinking about, or going to run for local office, some people look at you like, what, local office? What are you talking about? Who would want to do that? We're up here, we're meeting with the president, and we got kings and queens coming to meet with us in the Capitol today. Why would you want to go deal with the sewers in Fairfax County? So it definitely takes a certain kind of personality to want to go in that direction. I think one thing that was useful for me, in Congressman Connolly's office, and this obviously continues to this day with other folks in charge, we were always hyper-focused and very committed to the nuts and bolts, the blocking and tackling of constituent services. So if somebody in the 11th District of Virginia had a problem with their passport or with a federal agency, we were on it, and we had a great staff that was well organized to do that work. So I had that experience, which was very valuable coming into local office. So it was an easy transition for me to go from solving problems for constituents at the federal level to solving them at the local level, because a lot of the same principles of responsiveness, of obsessive attention to detail, of following up until the problem gets solved, I could transfer and apply pretty quickly. There's definitely a transition when you go from being the staff person behind the scenes or in the back of the room, to the person whose name is on the door and on the line and you're the one in the front of the room having to answer for yourself. That is a transition, no question about that. But I think over the 5 years I've managed it, I definitely had to work through that. It's easier to be in the back of the room and after the meeting say, you really should have said this or said that, or you could have done a better job with that, than to be the person who's in the front of the room having to do it himself
in real time. Absolutely. So Virginia is a diverse state in that it has a very rural components. It has urban areas. It has a lot of suburban areas in and around DC. How do you work with your state government and we've talked about the federal government in order to solve and address some of these issues?
Yeah, Virginia is vast. I think it's one of the things people don't realize. You do, I know, but Virginia is a big state, and there's big differences between increasingly urbanized Northern Virginia, the Richmond area, the Hampton Roads and Tidewater areas, and huge rural communities in Virginia where agriculture is still their primary industry and primary focus. And one of the things I enjoy in this job is the opportunity to work with other local elected officials from every corner of Virginia, from every county in Virginia. And no question, there are big differences between Fairfax County and Fluvanna County. I have a friend of mine who's on the Fluvanna County Board of Supervisors. It's a small county. He's a high school PE teacher. He drives the school bus. He teaches the driver's ed, and he's on the Board of Supervisors. So you have folks who are really doing it all in these counties, which you wouldn't be able to pull off. I don't think I could do all those jobs in Fairfax County the way he does it. But there are also a lot of things that unite us. What we realize when we talk is at the end of the day, we're all trying to figure out how to do the same things, right? How do we fund high quality schools? How do we grow our economy to continue to attract good paying jobs to our county? So, and even though we might have real partisan differences, we can unite around those kind of fundamental things that we're trying to do as local governments. And Virginia is a challenging place for local governments. We are what's called a Dillon Rule state, which means the local governments can only do those things that the General Assembly expressly allows us to do. So if it's not in the Constitution of Virginia, if it's not in the Code of Virginia, we've got to go and ask for that authority. So we have a lot of engagement, as you might imagine, with Richmond and a lot of work to do to try to give local governments the flexibility and authority they need to respond quickly to the needs of the people in their communities.
And this is where politics comes in. And Virginia has off-cycle elections that are often indicators, not always, but sometimes indicators for where the rest of the country may go. Can you talk about the politics of Virginia and what you're seeing in 2025?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Virginia, because we have off-year elections, I think it's Virginia and New Jersey that have the off-year gubernatorial elections. We tend to be a bellwether, and a pretty good bellwether. I can remember in 2009, President Obama had just been sworn in. Gerry Connolly had just been sworn in to Congress. Democrats were riding very high. And then in the governor's race in November of 2009, Republicans had a huge victory, massive victory, won the governor's mansion, expanded their margins in the General Assembly. And it was certainly portended the outcome of the 2020 midterms. And I think you might see a similar dynamic this year in Virginia. I think there's a good chance that Democrats will send a very strong message to the White House and to the country about what folks in Virginia how folks in Virginia feel about what's happening. We have a great candidate for governor in Abigail Spanberger, who I think, even in a difficult year for Democrats, would be a very strong candidate, likely to win. I think we could be looking at a very good year for Democrats with a strong candidate in Abigail Spanberger. So we don't take anything for granted. We're working very hard, but I think both history and what I'm seeing and feeling on the ground suggests the opportunity for a very big victory that, personally, I hope does portend the outcome of the 2026 midterms.
And I mean, sort of bring it back full circle. These huge federal cuts and dismantling of entire agencies. There's been an element of shock as it's happened so quickly. I guess, are you sensing that there is now going to be a political response from these people who, as you say, on every block, you have somebody who lost a job, lost a contract, is impacted in some way? Do you sense that people are sort of emerging from this and starting to fight?
Absolutely. And I think one of the key errors that the Trump administration and Elon Musk have made is believing or assuming this myth that every federal employee is somehow a card-carrying member of the Democratic Party or a far left liberal. They seem to really believe this. And I can tell you that federal employees are Democrats, independents, Republicans. A lot of them don't give a damn about politics and just want to go into work and do a good job serving the country. So they have not just offended, but I think enraged a huge swath of Virginians from all political persuasions, including a lot of veterans, by the way. And I think they will learn what they've done in November of 2025.
Well, with that, that's a good note in these very challenging times to find bright spots. I appreciate you sharing that perspective from the ground, and we love having you in New Deal. We love seeing what's going on in Northern Virginia and the approaches to affordable housing and transportation and all the delivery of services that ultimately is what we're responsible for. And so thank you for joining us today, and thank you for being a part of New Deal.
Thank you, Ryan. Really enjoyed it.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at New Deal for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.